Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum, located in North St. Louis, is the final resting place of many who made history, not just for the city, but for the whole country. And while the name Frank R. Tate might not have the public recognition it once did, his mausoleum there, built in the evocative Egyptian revival style, certainly suggests that the man buried within had lived an interesting life. Recognized as one of the top theater managers in America at the time, Tate not only introduced a relatively unknown Harry Houdini to St. Louis, but also had a hand in pushing the illusionist's career past vaudeville and into legend.
In the early 1900s, St. Louis was still one of the 5 or 6 largest cities in the nation. Theaters were one of the most prominent sources of entertainment for most St. Louisans. And a great number of those theaters are owned by Frank Tate. He also ended up owning theaters in Chicago and New York City. So he was a huge part of the vaudeville promotion circuits that were going on at that time. So at Frank Tate's Columbia Theater, which was on 6th Street just south of the Washington Avenue Garment District, had vaudeville shows running continuously from 11 o'clock in the morning all the way until midnight. Every hour there was a show repeating. You would see comedians and acrobats and musical performances and of course magicians, which is what brought Houdini here to St. Louis for his first few visits.
Harry Houdini started life as Eric Weiss, the son of Hungarian immigrants who settled first in Appleton, Wisconsin, where his father served as a rabbi, before moving to New York City. Inspired by the life of Jean-Robert Houdin, a French illusionist who elevated magic from a street art to the stages of Paris, young Weiss took on a version of his hero's name and developed his own act, eventually landing a coveted spot on a vaudeville circuit, if not on the billing. The first time Houdini came through St. Louis, his act was second to last.
In 1897, he appeared at the Hopkins Grand Opera Theater alongside his wife Bess, and they performed their trademark trick, the metamorphosis. What happened was they wheeled this large trunk out on the stage. Harry Houdini was tied up and locked inside the trunk, and Bess stood on top of it, holding up a curtain so the audience could not see what was happening. When the curtain dropped, the two had switched places. Houdini was on top of the trunk and Bess was locked inside. The trick did great for them, but not great enough to really propel them to the top of the pile.
And while Frank Tate and other organizers of vaudeville circuits made a fortune, Houdini struggled to remain relevant and unique in the crowded, ever-evolving scene. Taking some advice from a promoter, he began leaning into his elaborate handcuff escapes.
He had busted out of hundreds of different pairs of handcuffs. It became his go-to trick. But even Houdini realized there was a problem with this that was ultimately going to catch up with him. One handcuff escape is essentially the same as any other. When Houdini came to the Columbia Theater in January of 1908, he was still being billed as the Handcuff King, but when he looked out across the crowd, he saw a lot of empty chairs. And Frank Tate saw a lot of empty chairs as well. In a state of disgust about the small returns he had gotten on the night, Tate reportedly told Houdini, "You're not worth a $5 bill to me." When Houdini was writing about this exchange in his diary later that night, he wrote, "It's fear that attracts us to the man who paints the flagstaff on top of a tall building." He realized he needed to introduce a sense of danger into the acts he was doing on stage to recapture people's attention. So the very next night, January 27th, 1908, the crowd that had sat there yawning and disinterested the night before watched as a giant galvanized milk jug was wheeled out onto the stage. Attendants filled it with endless buckets of water. Harry Houdini stepped in and descended below the surface. They closed the lid and sealed it with a series of 6 locks. They wheeled a curtain out in front of the stage, and the audience sat in complete captivated silence. Attendants come out with axes as if they were going to bust this can open at any minute if all went wrong. Finally, Houdini whipped back the curtains soaking wet and alive. The audience roared with applause, and the milk can escape would become one of Houdini's trademark stunts. From that point forward, his shows had transformed from being acts of technical escapability to acts that had this illusion of danger, convincing people that they were watching something that could go totally wrong, that this was not controlled anymore. This was the moment, this particular night in St. Louis, where his entire career shifted focus and he dramatically reinvented himself.
When he came back to St. Louis in 1914 with a revised version of the stunt called the Upside Down, Houdini escaped this time in full view of the audience. Houdini's final visit to St. Louis was in 1922, But this time, the performance blended live stunts with clips from his Hollywood films.
Vaudeville was seeing its way out with the dawn of films, and Houdini realized this was the end of his acts as he knew it, and he leaned hard into embracing film.
He also thrilled St. Louisans by hanging upside down from a fourth-floor window at City Hall, confined in a straitjacket.
It stopped traffic along 12th Street and along Market. It took him less than 3 minutes to escape from this regulation straitjacket while dangling upside down more than 60 feet in the air with thousands of people watching him.
In 1926, Harry Houdini achieved what was arguably his greatest escape, this time from old age and obscurity. The world-famous illusionist died from appendicitis on Halloween night at the age of 52.
Of course, his name has never left us. It really was a physical act that he was doing, but it was also about his ability to understand the magic of it all being equally about what people were feeling in their seats as what was happening on the stage. I think that is really the legacy of Houdini, that he was willing to put his body and his mind through this to just give people a little bit more and get one more round of applause every time.
So far as is known, Frank Tate never connected his $5 bill insult with Houdini's rebirth as a performer. The theater giant went on making money until his own death in 1934, his mausoleum a reflection of the fantastical vaudeville era that paved the way for an icon.